Two astronauts packed for 8 days. They came home 9 months later. Sticky propellant valves and 5 dead thrusters stretched an 8-day trip into 9 months, and the fix was never a repair. The easy story is Boeing built a lemon. That misses the point. This was Starliner's first flight with people aboard. The crew flight test. The last box to check before NASA would trust it to carry astronauts routinely. Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams were the crew. NASA wants 2 separate ways to reach the station, so one grounded vehicle never strands the whole program. The real reason 8 days became 9 months hides in a pod that ran too hot. Start with what those thrusters do. A rocket engine gets you off the ground, but threading a spacecraft into a docking port a few inches at a time needs something gentler. That job falls to the reaction control system, a set of small jets spread around the capsule that nudge it up, down, and sideways. Think of parallel parking, except the car floats and one wrong push sends it drifting. Fire the right jets in the right order, and the capsule creeps toward the station under tight control. Here's where it went wrong. During the final approach, those small jets began quitting. Not all at once. One dropped off lines, then another until 5 of them had failed. Every jet that dies takes away one direction you can push, and the flight computer has fewer ways to correct a drift. NASA doesn't wing this. Flight rules set a minimum number of working thrusters you must have to attempt docking safely. Enough that if another one quits mid-move, you can still back away clean. Losing 5 pushed the crew right up against that line. So they stopped. Wilmore and Williams held position short of the station while the ground worked the problem. They managed to recover some of the jets and eventually docked. But the message was already clear. 5 dead thrusters on the very flight meant to prove the vehicle was safe. That raises the obvious question. What would make 5 separate jets built the same way fail on the same trip? A coincidence doesn't do that. Something they all shared had to be breaking. And it was. Inside the pods that hold them. So what did those 5 jets have in common? Their neighborhoods. On Starliner, the thrusters are grouped into pods bolted to the outside of the service module. Engineers nickname each pod a doghouse, a little enclosure that shields the jets and their plumbing. And during flight, telemetry showed those doghouses were running hot. Hotter than the design expected. Now follow the heat inside. Each thruster is fed by a valve that opens to let oxidizer flow, then snaps shut. Sealing that valve is a small part made of Teflon. The same slick material on a non-stick pan. Teflon is tough, but it isn't fond of extreme heat. As the doghouse baked, those seals swelled and deformed, bulging just enough to pinch the passage they were supposed to keep clear. Here's the chain in plain terms. A puffed-up seal narrows the opening. A narrower opening starves the thruster of oxidizer. A starved thruster can't build full thrust. So from the outside, it looks like the jet simply died. 5 jets in the hottest pods, 5 swollen seals, 5 failures. The coincidence dissolves. And the heat didn't stop at the seals. The same high temperatures raised the odds of trouble in the system that pressurizes the propellant. The plumbing that pushes fuel toward the engines using helium. A hotter system is a leakier system, and leaks were exactly what showed up next. So the doghouse wasn't just cooking 5 jets. It was quietly threatening the one thing every return trip depends on. Pressure. Which brings us to the helium. That covers the jets. Now the leaks. Separate from the thruster problem, Starliner was losing helium. Helium doesn't burn. It's the muscle behind the fuel. It sits in tanks under pressure and pushes propellant toward the engines when a valve opens. No pressure, no push, no burn. Engineers already knew about one small helium leak before launch, judged it small enough to fly and lift it off. Then in orbit, more leaks appeared. Now they had a moving target. A system slowly bleeding the very gas needed to fire the engines for the trip home. Here's why that's frightening. The ride back isn't gentle coasting. To leave orbit, you fire a long, precise burn, the deorbit burn, that slows the capsule enough to fall into the atmosphere. That burn needs propellant, and propellant needs helium pressure behind it. If you can't say for certain how much pressure remains, you can't promise the burn completes. And a burn that quits partway leaves a crew in a very bad place. Then comes the cruelest part. The service module, the section holding the leaky plumbing and the troubled thrusters, is designed to be thrown away. It separates before re-entry and burns up in the atmosphere. So the hardware causing all the doubt was hardware nobody could ever bring back, open up, and examine. No lab bench. No swapping a suspect part. Engineers had to diagnose it blind, reading temperatures and pressures beamed down as numbers on a screen. How do you certify a ride home when the broken piece self-destructs before you can touch it? You test on the ground instead. So they took it to the ground. If you can't inspect the real hardware, you rebuild it and break it on purpose. At White Sands in New Mexico, engineers set up a replica thruster and fired it in a heat-soaked test rig, trying to recreate what the flight had done. And they succeeded. They got a seal to swell and deform the same way, confirming the doghouse heat story wasn't a guess. That's the good news. The bad news is what it implied about a crewed return. Now the decision. Two choices sat on the table. Option 1, strap Wilmore and Williams back into Starliner and ride it home as planned. Option 2, fly Starliner home empty and find the crew another way down. For weeks, teams ran the numbers on the thrusters, asking a single question. Could they be confident enough that the jets would perform through the whole deorbit burn? Here's the honest answer they reached. No, not confident enough. The tests explained the failure but couldn't promise it wouldn't repeat, and there was no way to be sure the helium margin held. On a cargo run, you accept a gamble. With 2 lives aboard, the bar is higher. So NASA made the call. Send Starliner back with nobody inside, and bring the astronauts home on a SpaceX Crew Dragon. The other vehicle. The whole reason NASA insisted on having 2. The backup plane wasn't a backup at all now. It was the ride home. But Dragon doesn't have empty seats lying around. To make room, NASA had to rearrange an entire rotation. Making room meant reshuffling the schedule. NASA's next Dragon mission, Crew 9, was already set to launch. So they flew it up carrying fewer people than usual, leaving 2 seats deliberately empty. Seats reserved for Butch and Suni to fill months later, when it was time for everyone to come down together. And that single move is why the calendar exploded. The astronauts couldn't just hail a ride the next morning. They had to wait for the station's normal crew rotation to come around. The scheduled handoff when one Dragon goes home and the next arrives. That wait is what turned an 8-day test flight into a stay of roughly 9 months. So picture the shift. They'd trained for a quick shakedown cruise. Instead, they became full station crew members, running experiments, maintaining hardware, and clocking months in orbit like any long-duration astronaut. The mission didn't fail so much as transform into something else entirely. And here's the twist that stings. When Starliner finally undocked and flew itself home, it did the whole thing autonomously. Separated, burned, re-entered, and landed under parachutes without incident. No crew, no drama, a clean touchdown. Which means the vehicle everyone was too uncertain to trust with people did, in the end, prove it could have carried them. That doesn't make the call wrong. You don't bet lives on a coin that happened to land heads. But it does explain why this whole saga feels less like a crash, and more like a long, careful hesitation. Now watch the whole chain snap together. The doghouse pods ran hotter than designed. That heat swelled the Teflon seals inside the propellant valves. Swollen seals choked the oxidizer, and 5 thrusters starved and dropped offline. At the same time, that same heat helped drive helium leaks in the system that pressurizes the fuel. Put those together. Dead steering jets plus uncertain pressure. And you get a spacecraft nobody could promise would complete its burn home. That destroyed confidence in a crewed return. Here's the real answer to the 8 days to 9 months puzzle. There was no wrench that fixes a swollen seal in orbit, and no way to inspect a module built to burn up. The only safe repair was time. Waiting for the next Dragon seat to open on the normal rotation. 8 days became 9 months not because of a disaster, but because the calendar was the fix. And this is where the second vehicle earns its keep. Because NASA had insisted on 2 independent rides to the station, it could choose safety over schedule. Parking a questionable Starliner instead of gambling 2 lives on it. Redundancy didn't prevent the failure. It gave NASA the freedom to fail without stranding anyone. So what do you take from this? The lesson isn't space is scary. It's how good engineering handles a bad surprise. Redundancy isn't wasted money sitting idle. It's the option to walk away from a risk you can't fully measure. Anytime a system carries something you can't afford to lose, your data, your power, a human life, the smart move is a second, independent path you can switch to without heroics. Starliner's crew got home safe not because the machine was perfect, but because there was another door. Build the second door before you need it. So it wasn't a fireball that stranded 2 astronauts. It was sticky valves and 5 quiet, dead thrusters that stretched their mission ninefold. Next, the harder question. What exactly must Boeing fix? The doghouse cooling, the seals, the helium plumbing, before anyone trusts Starliner to fly people again. Subscribe and we'll open that box next.